Thank you. As I start my remarks, I need to step back, and before we talk specifically about Pacific Plaza, I'd like to talk a little bit about Dallas urban core as at the 30,000 view. When I look at this image, you know, it's really hard to understand that people could live down there. What you see is infrastructure and drainage and things that don't look very human. But when you abstract it, I believe that there's art in that. And in this kind of figure ground, these remind me of arteries that give life, but they also remind me of threads. And along that line, these could be the thread of what I call Dallas's urban quilt. And the urban quilt is really like a quilt, like this quilt, this contemporary quilt, is really made up of the leftover pieces as infrastructure and society grows. The pieces that are left over are the opportunities for us as landscape architects to kind of knit that together. So with that in mind, I'd like for you to think about our city as a quilt. And a quilt to me equates comfort and peace and long-term family. Quilts are handed down generationally. And so I think it's a very romantic notion. But I'd like to also talk to you a little bit about, I've been in Dallas for 37 years. I've been with SWA for 40 years and worked in Dallas over that 40-year term. And over our history in Dallas, we've had a lot of contribution to the city of Dallas as a quilt. All this pink area is SWA's legacy here in our city. And this is our office. We actually started our office in the West End, which I can't orient there, but we've actually lived where we work and lived where we practice for the last 40 years. Some of those projects, you know, are now being repurposed by other people. Some of our landmark kind of work in Dallas was the Dallas West End in 1978. We actually won an argument with the urban planning department in Dallas. They wanted to close Market Street and turn it into an urban street mall. We didn't agree. The city council voted, and we believed that because it was a place called Froggy Bottoms at the time, it was a derelict part of town, it was being renewed, that people really needed to feel secure about being able to drive through it, to drive up in front of it, not park in a parking lot and make their way through the Dallas heat. We won that argument, and as now it's the technology district or something to that effect. Victory Park. I watched from my office in the West End Brewery building and the master plan for Victory Park being done. And now we're repurposing 6 square blocks of downtown Dallas called the East Quarter. All of these projects with thinner streets and broader sidewalks for people. And we've been around so long that some of our projects are being repurposed. A young George Hargraves in our firm worked on Carpenter Plaza in the beginning, and now it's just wonderful that this connection is being reborn as the new park. The Katy Trail, a 30-acre abandoned railroad through the city of Dallas that connects to 125 acres of contiguous parks. You know, I would argue this is the biggest park in Dallas, but it's really not in the urban core, and it's an ongoing project for SWA. And then a park just off the north edge of downtown called Griggs Park, which was actually by vote the first African-American park in Dallas back in the 20s. So a lot of history there, and it's really interesting. That park was developed on a very minor budget. It's a very popular place in downtown Dallas. Just a moment about the Katy Trail. Philip Henderson was the president of the Katy Trail when he hired SWA to work with him on the Katy Trail, and we took our little master plan around to cocktail parties and developers, and nobody was interested in the Katy Trail because it was dark and scary, right? And that's what it looked like in the past. And then when the Katy Railroad gave it to the city of Dallas constructed a half mile or so of 12-foot wide concrete walk, and then the organization Friends of the Katy Trail raised millions of dollars, and now the Katy Trail is a very a predominant public space in Dallas with over 1 million visitors a year. And we're just starting the next phase of the Katy Trail, which is another soft trail. And as someone said a minute ago, that thing that nobody wanted to be a part of a few decades ago, 15, 20 years ago, is now the generator of over $1 billion in building permits and construction along within a quarter mile of its edge. That's a pretty remarkable story. And as part of our new work that we're doing at the Katy Trail, we're going to start revegetating the urban forest, because as you can imagine, it's been under a lot of pressure. The atmosphere change, the weather change, all that has really affected that corridor. And we're all familiar with these types of statistics, but the one that strikes me most as we move into Pacific Plaza is that it's been documented that Parks and Recreation generates about a 7-to-1 return on investment. For those of you who don't know this, the City of Dallas and Parks for Downtown Dallas combined their resources for $80 million worth of construction before the end of 2022. And when you think about a 7 times return on investment, $600 million, that's going to have a tremendous effect on not only our city, but our city from a national perspective, an international perspective, but most importantly, for the lives of those who live in Dallas. I have a great pleasure. Don't know how I actually ended up with this job, but I did. And I was happy to do it, to get a call from Robert Deckard and ask me if he could talk to me about one of the signature parks, Pacific Plaza. I want to address and identify my 100% Dallas-based team. And there's a little bit of an important notion about this. At this point, the Dallas bond issue had not been affected and approved. Robert Deckard was putting at-risk money in retaining the services of SWA to design and to a park that he could then use to help with the bond initiative. And so all of our great partners, specifically, I hired the consultant HKS, the architect HKS, to be a direct team member, and you'll see the important role that they played for us. Historically, Dallas has been a very dense city. You can see Pacific Plaza in the lower right there, Pacific Avenue, and kind of the density of downtown, and that also has helped. We've always had a very light density on the Pacific Plaza. As we look back at history and we understood the importance, you can see that between 1882 and 1905, you can see the presence of rail lines, trolley cars. Pacific Plaza actually had depots in this area. And in fact, there's a story that the Majestic Theater actually had a private offshoot for rail for entertainments and stars that would come in. They could back into the Majestic Theater, which is just right here off the edge of Pacific. But sometime between 1905, 1921, the rail seemed to go away as we entered into a much more car-centric kind of period of life. And I've been in Dallas for 37 years, and even though that picture there says 2016, that has been a parking lot since I've been coming to Dallas, since the early 80s. The age of the automobile, this particular part of Dallas was known for car dealerships and assemblage of cars and car manufacturing of parts. So a lot of surface area was required to facilitate those types of businesses. It became, as corporations, Ben Carpenter's company, Southland Life, was down in this part of the city. ASTON Park, which was named after Jimmy Aston, who was the founder and chairman of Republic Bank Tower. His family dedicated this small piece of the park to him in the early 2000s. And then here's a construction project along Live Oak. And Live Oak is essential to the ultimate master plan. But as we look back just for a moment, this is approximately 2001. And you can see that the park is there, Aston Grove. Things look a little barren, a little dry. The initiatives have not really begun there. This was actually at this point kind of a sad and kind of lonely edge of downtown, I think. Well, I got my first opportunity to look at Pacific Plaza when the developer of this project, or the owner of this project, a man named Sean Todd with Todd Interest, bought what was known as Patriot Tower, and it became One Dallas Center out of a bankruptcy court from a REIT for a very, very reduced amount of money. And Sean was very interested in redeveloping One Dallas Center, but Sean had a little bit of a trouble here in that he had really no parking at his building, or in the front of his building, and he actually felt like that he should be able to build a road between Harwood and North St. Paul here to facilitate head-in parking and things. And I was working for Sean on the renovation of this building. I was at a meeting with Sean and Willis at one point, and they seemed to be a potential conflict, and that Willis, by mandate, could not agree to sell land that was owned by the Parks Department to a developer, even though the developer would buy him land somewhere else, and they were kind of at a loggerhead. And so I was sitting at my desk one day looking at this drawing and kind of saw this opportunity to do a land swap where we would actually take a piece of the parkland and exchange it for a piece of the frontage of One Dallas Center. And Sean thought that was an interesting idea. He asked me to present that to Willis. I did, and then very quickly, through a series of planning department and city council actions, it was just kind of conveyed, and we avoided that potential issue. But I knew that the really interesting thing was, and I think Willis caught it really quickly too, is that there stood to be the potential for this building to one day be on a park, because Pacific Plaza was in the park's master plan. And so when we worked with Sean Todd at Todd Interest to renovate what became this renovation, I was always really struck by the IMPA design that broke the orthogonals of the city grid. And his diamond-shaped building there was very inspirational. This was to be the front door. And so I laid a stitch out to what would become the address here along North St. Paul that is to the elevator core of this building that really followed kind of IMPA's kind of inspirational lines. And in the back of my head, I knew that if I ever got a chance to design Pacific Plaza, that line would become very important to the reconfiguration of this space and to what I thought might be a design for Pacific Plaza. In fact, I offered to on a pro bono basis, draw a version of the park for Sean Todd, because Sean was going to flip that building, and I knew that Sean, in the way he talks, could turn that into extra money on the sale of the building, because he had a building that was going to be located on a park in Dallas. Let me step back and say that the Hargraves plan identified the idea of connectivity and walkability between parks, and for the last couple of years, the Trust for Public Land has had what they call their 10-minute walk initiative. We like to think of Pacific Plaza as being kind of the hub of the 10-minute walk, and you can see you're just 2 blocks from Carpenter Plaza, a couple of blocks from HARWOOD Park, a little bit further to the farmers market. And what's really fascinating is that 15 years ago, none of this existed so much that you could actually kind of stay in parks through the various initiatives all the way to the West End Plaza. Another thing that made this park interesting was that DART had become a reality. HKS Architects signed a long-term lease in this building, One Dallas Center, Sean Todd's building after it had been renovated. It actually has a couple of hundred dwelling units within the building now. And HKS, about 40% of their staff, their employees, ride the DART rail to work every day. So this is real connectivity in a city that really didn't have it. But you can now see with the transfer of property and the renovation to the front of One Dallas Center that there was a little bit of something going on. Sean had his service area here, his amenity core. Fun story was there was a piece of sculpture right here that was sitting on a plaza right there, and Sean didn't like it, and he told us to dig a hole and push it over and bury it. I said, Sean, I don't know that sculptor, but I think that's an important piece of sculpture. So we're going to move on. That sculpture ended up being worth over a couple of $1 million. Pacific Plaza looks at a very, very interesting and rich tapestry of architectural history. There's over 100 years of architecture kind of facing Pacific Plaza. We went through a process where we used wonderful examples of all of your works to identify through our 3 public outreach meetings what people looked for in a park. And as Christy said, people wanted lawns, they wanted a place to be social, they wanted effective nature, they wanted structure, and they wanted something iconic. You know, we then did a comparison of Pacific Plaza against all the other various parks that had been designed for downtown Dallas. And one of the things that Robert and his board and the SWA decided was that not every park had to have all identical elements. We didn't all have to have fountains. We didn't all have to have dog parks. We didn't all have to have all the very similar repetitive things. So we did a survey of what we had. The site was an existing site, an exciting site. Live oak bifurcated. It was important to consider live oak being eliminated. We started drawing concepts, and so I looked back at the great work done by all of my peers and looked at what I call the form of their parks, from Tom Balsley's Main Street Garden to Carpenter Park with the slice turn, to the Harwood Garden with its affected, to Jim's Clyde Warren Park, and to the berm and fountains. And I aspired for Pacific Plaza to have a very recognizable form. We started drawing, we started conceptualizing. We had to conceptualize with leaving live oak and the possibility of taking live oak out. I had an idea about something lyrical and artistic. I knew that it was going to be a green space, but I had an idea of something. I hired HKS to work with me on that something, and as we developed schemes, and as we had affirmation from the city that we could close live oak, you could see the benefit of taking the Aston Grove into the greater boundary of the park. Landform was a great thing, and as we began to develop the park, our iconic elements began to identify themselves. I wanted an outreach gesture to that architectural history of downtown Dallas. I wanted something that was a datum and leveled the park. We had 6.5 feet of grade change kind of through the park from the upper corner to the Harwood, to the Pacific and North St. Paul corner. So the master plan of Pacific Plaza resulted in this drawing. And this drawing really identified and was given form to all the various pieces of the park that we had. Of key importance, as you can see, that there are 23 existing very mature Quercus virginiana live oaks left on the corner there that are the Aston Grove. Programmatically, we have social spaces, we preserve things, we have a completely different dog strategy, kind of an experiment. We think it'll work. We have gardens, we have what we call play. We don't have a playground, we have play. We wanted adults and children to have items to choose from, and then we have iconic elements. I'm very proud of the fact that it was about 90% hard, heat island when we started the project, and now it's 57% green. Hundreds of trees planted and many, many more preserved. There's over an acre of green parkland. The perimeter of the park, the lifted section there is buffalo grass, low water kind of consumption. We have an interesting idea that we called, a Willis word called dog intercept. We don't have a dog park. We have large areas that are accessible to humans and to dogs, where we have a large area of compacted ADA accessible gravel that has extensive drainage system beneath it, and several times a day it will just be washed with a light irrigation wash and will drain that uric acid off. And without having to, one of the things we heard in our public meetings was that people didn't like putting little dogs and big dogs in the same area. A lot of people are concerned about dog in many ways and the health of dogs. So let's just, in my last few minutes, talk about the items. There's the pavilion, which is the iconic gesture towards urban Dallas. This was designed by Heath May and his team at HKS Line. It makes reference to this history of Dallas. It has a perforated screen. It's 138 foot by 98 foot oval. And in the perforations of the screen are the names of all the cities, dwellings, and water stops between New Orleans and El Paso, Texas. This is a shot from last week, and you can begin to see the pattern of fridding. This is right before the park got its first haircut, and so it's a little raggedy. It's under construction. There's play. We have custom designed play areas. The swings have not been mounted yet, but these are both can accommodate adults and children. We have the Aston Grove. This may be the most unique space in the park. And Aston Grove is a new garden found within the core of the old Aston Grove. You can see the shade. It's a respite of deep shade that it will be, I think, one of the great eventual details. The HARWOOD Promenade is actually a 430-foot promenade, 30-foot wide, planted with lacebark elms, that's aspirationally one day will go from the Dallas Farmers Market all the way to Clyde-Warren Park. And in that kind of notion of threads, we have this thing we call the thread, and it's 400 tons of Indiana variegated limestone, which stretches in a unifying gesture as a thread does across the park to kind of sew together all the disparated pieces. This is a 2-minute time-lapse video. We've all shown each other the results of our work, but there's a lot of rigor that went on to get this park to where it is today. By the way, this is, we're taking a picture during daylight hours every 7 minutes. And so this is hours of video taken down to a 2-minute production. We're going to leave the camera running for another year, and our XL lab at SWA is going to be doing an urban design study. Thank you. Enjoy your conference.